This is the story of 10th on April 1912 about the RMS Titanic, the world's largest and most luxurious ship at its time. It set out on its maiden voyage, traveling from Southampton, England, to New York. On board were all kinds of people, renowned industrialists, actors, and immigrants, heading to America in search of a better life. Commanding this magnificent vessel was the 62-year-old senior captain, Edward John Smith. The passengers, public, and media were all excited about this ship. Not only was it the world's largest ship, about 269 meters in length and more than 53 meters high, but the luxury it offered was awe-inspiring. In those days, it cost $7.5 million to build the ship, which, when adjusted for inflation, equals around $400 million today. The facilities and decorations on the ship could rival even a five-star hotel. It had stained glass mirrors, ornate wood paneling, 2 grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, a gym, a squash court, 4 restaurants, 2 barbershops, and even a library. Moreover, the safety features of the Titanic led many to believe it was unsinkable. White Star Line, the company that built the ship, was so confident in this belief that the vice president publicly declared the ship unsinkable. However, 2 days after it set out on its first voyage, on 12th of April 1912, the Titanic began to receive its first ice warnings. The Atlantic Ocean, which the Titanic was crossing to reach America, was full of icebergs, large ice mountains that posed a significant danger to the ship. These warnings were not unusual. Ships often communicate through radio and signal nearby vessels about the presence of ice in their vicinity, advising caution. After receiving these warnings, the Titanic altered its course twice to avoid danger, but did not reduce its speed. It continued its journey at a speed of 21.5 knots, equivalent to 40 kilometers per hour. 2 days later, on 14th of April 1912, 7 more ice warnings were issued, but Captain Smith and his crew ignored them, not slowing down the Titanic. As the day ended, the sun set and the temperature dropped. Notably, on the night of 14th of April, the moon was not visible, which meant no moonlight and low visibility. The ship had a crow's nest, a small platform at a height that served as a lookout point. Someone was always stationed there to watch for obstacles. On that night, Frederick Fleet was on duty in the crow's nest. The cold winds made it difficult to see, but at 11:39 p.m., Fleet spotted a massive iceberg directly ahead. He rang the bell 3 times to alert the crew below and quickly called the officers on the bridge. He screamed that there was an iceberg in front of them and the ship needed to be steered immediately. First Officer William Murdoch heard the message and signaled the engine room to steer the ship to the left. Unfortunately, it was too late. Just 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the ship crashed into the iceberg. The iceberg wasn't small. It was about 200 or 400 feet in length, roughly the size of a football field, and as high as the crow's nest. Scientists estimate that the iceberg weighed around 1.5 million tons. The Titanic's front right side collided with the iceberg, specifically near the bow. You can see in this picture that the part at the front is called the bow. The part above the bow is called the stern, and the protruding part below is the keel. For about 10 seconds, the ship grazed against the iceberg, creating a huge dent, and small holes formed in the ship's hull. After the collision, Captain Smith and the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, arrived to assess the damage. They quickly realized that the ship was going to sink. They were utterly shocked. This was the unsinkable Titanic. Earlier, I mentioned that the Titanic was considered unsinkable due to impressive safety features. There were 2 main features that led to this belief. 1, the ship had a double-bottomed hull. This means there were 2 layers to the hull, so if the bottom layer was damaged, the second layer could protect the ship. 2, the hull was divided into 16 separate watertight compartments. Even if 4 out of the 16 compartments were filled with water, the ship would still stay afloat. But the impact of the iceberg was on the side of the ship. The double-bottomed hull was useless since the sides only had a single layer. Additionally, the impact breached 6 of the 16 watertight compartments, and water was filling them. The limit was 4. With 6 compartments breached, the ship couldn't be saved. The unsinkable ship was going to sink. 20 minutes after the collision, at 12 a.m., Captain Smith ordered his crew to send a distress call over the radio, hoping nearby ships would pick it up and come to their rescue. Senior radio operator Jack Phillips is the hero of this story. He sent out distress signals one after the other, but there was no response. Finally, at 12:20 a.m., a ship called RMS Carpathia, which was near the Titanic, detected the signal. The Carpathia's operator communicated with the Titanic and immediately directed their ship toward the Titanic to rescue them. The problem was that even though the Carpathia was close by, it was still 107 kilometers away. Even at top speed, it would take the Carpathia 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic. Would the Titanic stay afloat for that long? Meanwhile, the Titanic's crew lit flares and rockets in the sky, hoping to catch the attention of any nearby ships. But apart from the Carpathia, there was no response from any other ship. Meanwhile, Captain Smith ordered the evacuation of passengers using the lifeboats, giving priority to women and children. However, most passengers weren't scared at first. They believed the Titanic was unsinkable. After all, that's what the advertisement said repeatedly. So, even though they hit an iceberg, they thought there was no reason to worry. Because of this, the first lifeboat, which had a capacity of 65 people, was lowered with only 28 people aboard. As time passed and more compartments filled with water, the ship began to tilt. Gradually, passengers realized the ship might actually sink. Panic set in, and people began running around in chaos. By 1 a.m., the bow was submerged, and the stern began to rise out of the water, exposing the propellers. This tilt caused even more chaos as people fought for a place on the lifeboats. That the ship broke into two halves around 2:20 a.m., and then it slowly began to sink. It didn't even take 3 hours for the unsinkable ship to sink. Of the 1,500 people still aboard, most either drowned or were killed by hypothermia. The water temperature was 2 degrees Celsius, cold enough to cause death within minutes. It is said that Captain Edward Smith stayed at the wheel until the very end and went down with the ship. Some even believe he took his own life.